Welcome to the final episode of the second season of the Denoise podcast, the show that's all about the 3D animation software Blender and is hosted by the Blender training website CG Cookie. I'm Jonathan Lampel, one of the instructors at CG Cookie and product manager for Blender add-ons at its sister company Orange Turbine. Joining me as a co-host today is Kent Trammell, another CG Cookie instructor and director of the impressive Community Collab short film projects. Our guest is none other than Ian Hubert, who is known for his visually stunning web series Dynamo Dream, as the director of the open movie project Tears of Steel, and creator of the thoroughly entertaining Lazy Tutorial series. In this conversation, we talk about inspiration, how Blender is meant to be used, a weird recent shift in the creative landscape, the transition between working on projects with a couple buddies to hiring a whole film crew and going all out, and a whole lot more. So without any further ado, here's Ian Hubert. Welcome, Ian Hubert. How you doing?
Thank you. I'm doing very good. Excited to be here.
Amazing.
Man, it's an honor to meet you. You've met Lampel before. This is my first time meeting you, so
Here in the basement
absolute legend
of the Fonda
This is an honor
Theater.
of mine. That's right. With under a Wolf Mother poster and all these other random bands.
I mean, you're going to mention Wolf. Well, I guess that's more famous than Tame Impala, but that's okay.
I like Wolf Mother too.
And we have a secret guest.
Oh my goodness.
Hello?
Are we being kicked out?
With a steel chair.
Special guest for round two.
Come on in.
Gosh,
Did you forget something?
How'd it go?
I thought I might. I'm looking for my badge. It doesn't matter.
Oh no.
But then I'd have to give you one of my microphones.
Wow. Hello, podcast listeners. Sorry to interrupt.
This is great.
So you were here before your talk and you killed it, as we knew you would.
I didn't kill it, but, I got
You
through
did kill it.
You did great.
I saw people crying.
It's emotion.
Ian killed it. Oh my God. You set the standard, dude.
No, I did it.
I'm gonna slowly back away.
Hey, thank you for popping in.
I'm
He's
so
sorry.
sorry.
just
Badge
talking
isn't here.
quieter.
I just assumed that
I'm sorry your badge is not here.
I was supposed to be in Colin's talk, but I was letting myself sleep in.
Ian, are you wearing Colin's badge? I thought... No.
Oh my goodness.
One thing that you mentioned on, I don't know whether it was Twitter or at some point, you said we need more shitty bands.
Yes!
Can you talk about
That's
that?
the conversation I want to have. Yes, I can. Enthusiastically. There's a weird shift, I think, in the past 15 years. And maybe it's just me getting older, and maybe it's just like time's always changing, kind of feel like that. But I remember very specifically, like when I was in Amsterdam working on Tears of Steel, that's the only time I've lived like out of Seattle. And so it's my big checkpoint in life for like 2012 is the only year I actually remember what happened then. So it was then. And all of my friends back in Seattle were making like a 48-hour film. Do you know about?
Oh, it's super fun.
Oh yeah. Okay. Right.
And everyone was doing that. Half the people I knew had web series. People were like making little things and making their albums and stuff. And a lot of that's that early 20s energy, which I like. When I was growing up as like a teenager, I had all of these older filmmakers just kind of come up and be like, "Hey, I've got cameras, and do you want to let me help you make a thing?" And I was like, why are these old people helping me? And now that I'm kind of getting up there, I'm like, I've got resources and stuff, but like I've got cameras and a stage, but all of my friends I used to make movies with all have like 3 kids and a job and moved, 3 hours out of the city so they can have chickens. And like all I want is that like ludicrous energy that you have when you're younger before you kind of know that like your film isn't any good. I'm like, I want to help you make your bad movie like other people help me. But even beyond that, like being in high school, everybody was in bands. And like when I talk to high schoolers now, they're like, nobody's in a band. And I think, again, I don't want to be too like old man yelling at the clouds, but I think it's something to do with the oversaturation of growing up in this overly dense media environment. You're supposed to have an incubation period of really sucking at stuff, and that's how you figure out the bits that work. But when everything's so public, like if you're recording music and not putting it on the internet, then are you even recording music? And if you're putting bad music on the internet, well, that doesn't feel any good. So I feel like you're supposed to have,
Or you're recording music for the internet, and that also gets weird.
Yeah.
And it's like not really fun either.
yeah. Like there was a thing where when the internet was first kind of happening back during that time, where all the people who wanted to be novelists had their blogs, or musicians had their thing, or like filmmakers were like, great, now I have a platform, but they're still thinking in the old dynamic of I'm going to try to make my feature, I'm going to try to make my short. And especially here, I'm running into all these people actually trying to make their short animations and everything. but I feel like it's a very different mindset than what it was back then. And I don't know. I have to attribute to that lack of incubation time.
Oh, that's so interesting. Someone I talked to earlier from Barnstorm Effects, his way of learning, I said, you must learn fast, just hearing some of his stories, places he's been. And he's like, I don't think it's that as much as I do try and get to the failure quickly because that's where I learn the most. And that's how I start to iterate. Is that in the vein of what you're saying? Like you have to suck so that what you learn from sucking is a key part of growing.
I think a lot of times people you didn't know you sucked.
Oh,
you didn't have so many examples of all of the you were just the guy who did CG. You're like, oh, I'm the CG guy, and you're not in this giant thing of like, because of that, every time you open YouTube, you see a million other, you're not in the global society of animators. You're just, and the same with like bands. You're just the guy who play guitar, so you make a band and you're the best in the school, and that's kind of cool. You're not comparing yourself to like every other, band out there.
I see what you mean now. Right. What do you think? How could we bring that back around? Like staying off of social media more, or
I don't know. There's also the economy has not been great for like most of my adult life, and so I think there needs to be a certain, again, along with that, like just making a mess, being a dork, finding things out. The stakes are a little bit higher. Like most of the people I know now, it's like, no, I don't have time to spend every weekend making a movie. I have to like make money, and like, why am I going to spend all this time doing this if I can't monetize? I don't know. I don't know that, but eggs are expensive now, and
they
so
really
maybe
are.
People need to buy eggs instead of make a web series.
Oh, so in keeping with my first time meeting you, and I wanted to point out a memory that I have of Project London. Okay, so this goes way back, and you mentioned shitty bands. I wonder if this fits into like your time
Yes,
period
it
of
does.
that. But there is a scene in either a trailer or a teaser or something where there's a mech running on a rooftop, jumps off and does like a backflip or a gainer.
Oh,
is
all the
technically what
robots
it's
did
called.
backflips.
Okay. And that shot, I can trace back to, I mean, what year would that have been? Like 2010? Is
Something
that
like that,
something like
yeah.
that? And I think that was a moment where, because Blender's the free software, it's the free one, but you see something that's like legit, and all of a sudden it puts it on my map, and that was one of those shots that did that. Yeah. Anyway, so that was your shitty band phase, because that's funny. How does that fit? Like, it's good.
Yeah, I like it. It's fun. I wrote it when I was 18, and like you look at it and you go, yeah, that does make sense. That's and then we spent like 7 years in post on it, which is interesting to be 24. The change that you go through between being 18 and like, early mid 20s is like, hey, do you want to release something you wrote when you were a teenager? It's like, whoa, that's kind of wild. But no, that was a fun experience. All of the best stuff in Project London is Nathan Vegdahl.
Yeah.
Because he's an actual, basically everything else we're kind of figuring out as we went, and Nathan came in with actual animation chops. And like that whole ending bit where like the giant crab and the robot are fighting, that Nathan did all of that. And
No way.
I kind of wish just using modern rendering technology, like actual path trace stuff, it'd be so quick to just redo the materials. And all the projects were pretty organized. If I could ever find those files, just re-render the whole thing, like modern, because the animation still holds up.
I think it looks great the way it is. Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
That was I think that was all Blender internal.
It would have to be.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah.
Anyway, that was a fond memory I have of getting into Blender.
I'm glad the crabs are still around. That are still.
Oh, they always. All I know is taking sea creatures and making them bigger. A couple days ago, I was working on a scene where some characters are on a beach and like they need to see something weird. I'm like, giant starfish. I'm like, I've got one thing. Do you guys remember Landgren Williams? I say that as if like
William Landgren?
William Landgren.
Yeah.
Yes, I think that's
Fan.
his.
I like his.
I say
work.
remember as if it was like a month ago. But he's so good. He's every once in a while you just see somebody where it's like, oh, you've got like the
They got
thing.
that. Yeah.
My wallpaper on my computer for the past year and a half has been a frame from one of his movies he did. I think like one of the Liminal movie or something.
Yes.
Wow.
But there's this shot of a puddle, like kind of a murky puddle, completely like nondescript, and there's like cigarettes
I know
dispersed,
exactly
but
the one
they
you're talking
go
about.
down into the water in this like completely unremarkable way.
Yeah.
The sky's gray. You see the underside of a fire hydrant, which is kind of off out of the view, but you see the underside of it reflected in the puddle, kind of defining the composition. And it was so unremarkable that it just demonstrated so much like love of actual real life and observing the little, like everybody's always trying to do the big cyberpunk, you know, punching mech, whatever thing. And it's like, ooh, you're actually like bringing life and observations into the thing.
I know exactly what you're talking about.
He was so good so early that I was very invested in like, what does that do to be that young coming out with stuff that's actually just good compared to, and not just like for being a 14-year-old, but just good. And then that's the bar you feel like you have to operate at. I don't know where. I messaged him once. I'm like, what are you doing? He's like, oh, I'm learning piano. I'm like, great.
But that kind of makes sense. Like, what if he becomes like a piano prodigy? Like, he could sort of just jump. I feel like his interests might kind of be that way. I don't know. I've only heard him on the podcast with Andrew Price, but hasn't posted in like a year, I think.
Yeah.
I'm ready for another short.
I'm thinking probably because he figured out good patterns. I don't know. I'm hoping that's good instead of like complete burnout.
Yeah, true.
Totally. I mean, I really like that topic of just noticing the world and finding it interesting, because I think that's something that comes through in your work a lot, is just finding the weird things that are around every day and then making a spectacle out of them and how unremarkable they are. Do you ever find what's boring? Are you bored by anything? Is there anything that you look at and you're like, my mind just shuts off and you're like, it's not interesting? Or is just every single thing?
What is boring? This right here, right now. No, I don't know. Like some movies are. Oh, no, I don't know.
That's great.
I should have an answer for that.
No, it's probably great that you don't. Like, it's interesting that
like even just thinking about like usually most of the stuff when you're trying to do a creative thing like doing film or whatever, like you gotta write the script. And so even that, just sitting there being like, all right, I'm going to think about scripts for like a couple hours. I was so excited for the flight down here because just being forced to sit in a chair and think like, oh, that sounds great. Instead I read a book and I was like, oh man, I wasted my thinking time reading a book. But yeah, what do you think is boring?
I mean, I probably couldn't talk about like celebrity relationships or sports scores from a decade ago without being bored to tears. But
no, okay, yeah. I understand that I just haven't developed the wavelength to appreciate football, American football, or soccer. Like I just see it on that abstracted level of like there they are running around like kicking the ball. And it's like no, but each one has different. There's a story behind all of this, and you can engage with that more if you choose to. And I just know I haven't chosen to engage with that. Mm-hmm. Like I've had friends who did. We used to be like, oh yeah, we don't like sports, and then like. When my one friend Scott started working at a bar, and he goes, I like football now, and I was like, Scott. So I know it's possible. There's all the rules and things you can kind of learn. I just haven't.
That's a great perspective. Right? It seems like you're going through life realizing that there is something to marvel about everything that's happening.
Hopefully, yeah.
So you mentioned you were skeptic or cynical. How do those go together? You seem very positive, is what I'm trying to say.
You have to try to be positive if you're cynical, I think. You have to put extra work into it.
Okay.
Just, the times, whenever I extrapolate things, usually it's not to like good. I don't see most patterns as things getting better. I'm like, all the birds are dead. Kind of like think that a few times a day type thing. I think the fact that everything in American society is just trying to be monetized. I feel like everybody's trying to crank up that knob to making things as bad, giving you as little as possible, charging as much as possible, so they can like take their money and run away before the thing collapses. And I feel like you were just seeing that kind of everywhere. And like nobody's injecting anything that we can feed off of into that will help things grow in the future. Everybody's just trying to extract as much from this moment. And I very much believe like you have to put things it's that cycle. And I'm like, we're just in the extraction part of the cycle. I don't think I don't know.
Yeah, it's interesting.
That's the cynicism. I feel the same with like movies and media too. Like you look at all of the patterns of the big movies coming out. Everything's just trying to wring every piece of intellectual property dry, or all of people's sentimentality for as much as they can.
Seems like a great time to bring up AI.
Oh,
okay,
no.
I hate this conversation. I'm going to be honest, I hate it. But there was one thing that I thought There was a compelling perspective, I thought, from I think Nico on Corridor Crew, and he said for the 16-year-old who just dreams of making movies, AI, because he was that kid, and I can relate to being that kid. I'm sure you can too. AI kind of opens this opportunity to make those dreams reality without the extreme work of like learning computer graphics or visual effects, and I'm on the fence about that. Like, okay, I find that compelling. I wonder, do you think that enriches a modern teenager's ability to make film, or like in your experience, the difficulty of learning visual effects through Blender or by hand, I guess is how I would call it. Does the hard work enrich the young filmmaker?
That's because all the tools make things easier, and like the realization that you can go to like Turbo Squid or whatever and just buy all of the assets, put them into an HDRI, render them out, and you've made like a city, and you can do this in like 4 minutes. And like you can go, look, I made this render of a city. But like, what did you put into it? And so I had to kind of figure out like, and everybody has to figure out their own rules. I don't apply these onto stuff other people are making.
Right.
Although sometimes like I've been asked to judge animation challenges.
Oh.
And there'll be these giant renders of like big cities and crazy characters and all of that, and I don't get any information. I'm like, is this something they download? They just put a downloaded character into a downloaded scene, or is this 2 months, 3 months of them hand designing and making all of these decisions? These are two very different pieces of art in the way I appreciate them, even if like I wouldn't insist they be made one or the other way.
That's really interesting.
But yeah, my thing now is like I relate mostly to art and try to think about art in terms of it being a package for human ideas or emotion or energy and effort. Sometimes even just the fact that somebody worked really hard on something is what gives it value. Like artists who'll just like, I wove together 10 million toothpicks. It's like, why? And they're like, I did it. There's usually a reason. Probably they have a reason too. But
there's value in just the fact that you pulled that thing off. Yeah. Completely.
And it's the same thing with, again, I'm getting into old man territory, but like all of my music, I was listening through my Spotify, it's all people playing actual instruments. Again, old man, but like just in having this mindset in the first place. But then I'm listening to, I've got like, I know younger people, and I go, here, can you send me a playlist of like what people are listening to? And it's all like laptop, made on a laptop, and it's really cool.
Is that kind of the equivalent of the person who downloaded the city, downloaded the character, and
no, I wouldn't even say that, but just the it always sounds more polished than like I was very much in a like grew up with like a little more punk
grungy,
or like
imperfection,
folk, whatever. Like you're banging on an instrument, you're yelling into the little thing, and I feel like now if it comes down to, hey, with AI you can make your movie look like it cost $100 million, I want to think about that goal of like, well, is that the goal, to have a movie that looks like it costs $100 million? Right. And that I think is one of my least favorite things about the whole digital art space, is that there are a lot of shortcuts you can take, and especially because like social media. I'm just doing all the rants right now.
Hey, this is great.
Okay.
Right?
Like the fact that no, that's too many rants. Like social, everything's on social media now, and so it's like likes and all of that is basically like I know kids, like all my friends' kids who were growing up in kindergarten when COVID happened. We're only like a generation into this weird social media society now, where like everything has this like, if I meet somebody at a party and like they see my Instagram and it's like, oh, you've got like, like however many 100,000 whatever things, that gives a certain seriousness when I'm like, yeah, I make movies or something, as opposed to like if you saw they had like 70 or something. That's very weird. And it's like then they're like, hey, can you like message me? I want to collaborate with you or something. It's this weird kind of status thing that has nothing to do with anything except for numbers. And so I'm wondering, like, what does that do to kids who are growing up inside of that? And then at the time when ideally you're kind of figuring out your most chaotic social relationships and stuff in childhood, you're isolated in your home and forced to only exist with other people through that social media type thing. I'm like, oh man, we have no idea what's going to happen.
I feel like we're having a conversation that leads to the visuals that you're famous for. It's kind of like run down, like overly complicated, like reality. Anyway.
Oh, just the dystopia type.
Yeah.
I mean, one thing that I'm curious about, you talked about art being a package of information, emotion, things to communicate in a way. Is that what drives you to spend so much time on each individual project that you do? Because obviously, I don't know how many hours a week you spend on your projects, and I'd be curious to hear about that. But also, you've been doing this for a long time and spending the hours for years and years. Is it something that you want to communicate that's just inside of you that you're just like, I got to get that out? Or is it something that you see that you're frustrated by with other sources of media that you're like, I just want it to be different, and so I'm going to make it myself? Or where does that come from?
Yeah, no, for sure. I am doing it a little bit stubbornly at this point of like, all right, well, there's the easy way to do this, and then there's the way where like I think there's always a shortcut, and I'm finding myself erring on the sides of doing things the hard way more and more. So there was a period a couple of years ago when everybody, Corridor, where they were doing all their videos, like, you've got to do, AI. We're making all our videos with AI. Every friend, they had was doing stuff. People are always releasing new add-ons. We're like, look, you can create a cube, and there's a add-on inside of Blender that Midjourney will texture the cube and everything. You got to do this or you'll be left behind, which now is like such a little AI guy cliche. But and I was sitting there like, okay, well then what would, instead of replacing like an area where I would normally be putting effort in, like putting my own energy and ideas and stuff into it, what's something I couldn't do? And I always love the visual richness of like walking into a movie store or like a record shop or something where you see all of those different labels that all represent little projects other people did, and like that richness. So I'm like, okay, well I'll use AI to generate a few different like album covers and stuff, and that was fun. And also it was very fun to like just feed in the prompts and get the images out, as everybody's found out. I didn't know at the time how distinctively AI they would look. Like I thought I was getting all of these very diverse images out, but then like within 1 month of everybody just learning that AI kind of thumbprint, it's like, no, these are so obviously AI. I thought, people might not even know. And we used them in a practical set. We went and we printed them out and we kind of hung them up. And so they're there in the shots, but I felt it was literally the day of the shoot. I was like, man, I feel like the tide could switch on this actually. And the day after that was when everybody got mad at ArtStation and that little like, crossed out no AI thing. That was literally the day after I did that shoot. And I was like, man, and that made me kind of decide like if there's a way to, I want to be on the side that's trying to put energy into stuff instead of like trying to cut corners, I guess. It's that could change with time. I know things will, but like at this time right here, I'm like, I want to put my energy into a thing. And when you watch it, you know that if you're seeing a detail, like some other human somewhere put it there for you to like enjoy. So I ended up making 30 other album covers by hand to kind of like compensate as like a penance kind of. And so I spent a few days just like
Which is so interesting though, because I think if people watch your YouTube videos of the quick tutorials and lazy tutorials, whatever, it's here's the shortcut, right? Is kind of the point of the video. Here's how to do this thing fast. So hearing that it's about the effort as well might seem at first contradictory, but it's not about the process necessarily. It's not a creative shortcut. It's like a technical shortcut, but not a creative shortcut.
Well, that was like mostly the psychology of I've taught enough people Blender that you can see there's a time when they check out. There's this thing where they're like, okay, I got this. And then there's this kind of like, oh, like, no. Like if you say the list of things too fast, which is the thing I had to dial in with the narrations of the lazy tutorials. Like you can give somebody 3 quick things to do really fast and they can hold it in their head and do it. But like the moment you start to get too much, they're like, oh, this is complicated. So it's just trying to avoid that this is complicated thing. Because I think it's a lot easier to refine than like start from scratch. So the idea of like, and learning Blender if you have an already going project. So you start with a thing, you go, all right, I did it. That's great. Now, how do I improve it? Is I think a lot more fun than like, I can't figure out how to make anything. So all of those were trying to just convince people that they could do the thing. So they'd have enough inertia to jump into actually trying to learn how to do things kind of, quote, the right way.
I mean, there is a point where people tend to check out. I mean, obviously, I see that in my own work as well, definitely. But also with a lot of people that come through courses and whatnot, there's a point where people just stop as well. For example, in modeling course, I'll have an exercise that people can upload to the site, and it's all about modeling. And half the time, spent very little time modeling and most of it on materials and textures, when it's like it's all about like this one thing, but its attention span is so short, and there's things that are just hard to do, and even myself trying to push past that is very challenging. And I'm sure even many years on, you're still doing that for yourself.
Yeah, no, it's that's literally my workflow is I get so overwhelmed looking at a big on this episode I have coming out in like a couple weeks. There's so many montages, which means it's a whole thing you do just for 2 seconds, and then you got to start completely from scratch for the next 2 second shot. I mean, I got a lot of assets and stuff, so it's not totally starting from scratch. But that thing of like, all right, I've blocked in the shot. It's just a bunch of white cubes, and that moment of like, now I have to start the 2-day process of like turning it into an actual shot. And so what I do is I just I'll cube project a texture on it. I'll set up the lighting. I'll throw in as many of the pre-made assets as I think, I feel like I want, just to make it look like something. So I have something I can look at and be like, that's the shot I'm making. But now this thing is bugging me. And I can very easily spend 2 days just fixing the thing that's bugging me, as opposed to like, if I'd started trying to fix that tiny detail, like modeling that tiny detail, it would be demoralizing to like then zoom out and see the whole white thing, like the white cubes everywhere. So yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense.
I mean, that's a great little mental like workflow switch to just get excited about what you're working on.
I never start a shot thinking I'll be perfectionist on it. I'm always like, and this will be the quick one, and I'll jump it in the timeline, but then seeing it in the timeline, things start to bug me. And so I'm at the point, I'm redoing every shot like 4 or 5 times now, just because like,
oh my goodness.
Oh, wow.
I'm always trying to be like, I'm going to do this one fast, and then I come back.
I was always wondering how much work you do before you even get to the camera and footage part of it. How much are you planning out and building beforehand?
Oh, with the live action type stuff? Usually, because everything is montagey these days, the big thing I'm trying to change right now is like, actually, we're going to build a location, we're going to use CG to enhance it, but we're not doing all of these, again, starting from scratch every single shot, 2 years for every 15 minutes type deals. But because we are just using basically every location for one shot, when I have an actor on a green screen, I don't really have to give him any instructions. I'm like, wherever you walk, I'll just make that the walkable place in the environment. If you stumble, great. I can add a thing that you stumbled on. In fact, my big challenge is just I have to remember to stick weird lights and things in random places to force me to like make the environment interact with them in some way. Otherwise, it feels like they're just walking around on an empty stage. But yeah, I'd be curious more about like when you've noticed people do check out from the tutorials, like, because so much of tutorials is just the psychology of understanding the learning process of people kind of coming along.
I mean, that just probably more has to do with us or myself being a better teacher and trying to get people past that. So wherever they're getting stuck is also probably where I need to help more or be more effective in teaching. But a lot of it is modeling and not going through and re-looking at things like proportions and measuring things or refining details or whatever. And then with texturing, it's adding a texture. Okay, cool. But how does that actually make sense with the world and how to, break it up so that it's not just one procedural pattern everywhere and just basic things like that.
The one of the most frustrating things for me. So with story exposition, when you're like giving plot information or whatever, or with tutorials, there's this thing I found, which is that it rarely works to give information that the audience isn't already asking. So that's how I try to structure like my plot. If a character's telling another character something, I want it to be something that the audience is like, oh, I was wondering about that. Otherwise, you're just trying to jam information in their brain there's no room for. And I run into that with tutorials where I'm like, there's a right way to do this that will say, like, years from now, there's a right way to do this, and it looks annoying and boring, but you'll save yourself so much work if you just do it this slightly more frustrating, like learning linear color workflows and all of that. I drug my heels on that for so many years, and people were trying to tell me like, no, you want to learn this. I'm like, no, I don't. I'm just gonna do it my way, mix and match JPEGs and all that. Finally learning that, I'm like, oh, 90% of my work with compositing was trying to match black levels because I was trying to composite log into like linear and like all of this stuff by hand all the time. And I try to bring that information into tutorials. Like, look, just bear with me. We're going to learn it. It's going to be slightly harder, but save you so much time. And everyone always checks out. Like, nope, we want that immediate kind of thing. And I'm like, okay. The number of tutorials, like Nathan Vegdahl's helped me make so many cool tools of like the right way to do it. This has leveled me up so much. I'm so excited about this all the time. Nobody else cares at all. Because it's answering a problem it's answering a question that they haven't been asking it, or it's like solving a problem that they don't know exists. So those videos, the moment I'm like, look, you have a problem, you don't even know it. They're like, we don't care. No, we don't. I'm like, oh.
That's the whole learning process, though, is just doing that over and over and over again until eventually you're like, oh, I kind of get this. And then when you think that, then you're wrong. And then you got to figure it out again.
Oh, yeah. No, I don't know color workflow at all. I know enough to know like my little thing, but like compared to actual people who know, Jeez Louise.
What about geometry nodes? Have you onboarded that into your workflow yet?
What's crazy about geometry nodes is it's the thing I was talking about. Like, you look around life and there's rules for everything and it's incredible. And like the fun part of bringing that, I think if you're going to try to recreate the world, like you do have to, like in CG, you have to be obsessed with the real one a little bit and be finding those secret patterns and things. Like what makes, it's the reason I love the old like hand painted matte paintings and stuff from like the old 70s, 80s movies. Right. Because a lot of times they're that Bob Ross impressionistic kind of thing where they're doing a swath of paint to represent a larger thing. And it's because they understand the visual essence and like the human experience of the shapes they're processing, and they know how to reduce it without losing the essence of the thing. So your brain is just right there. And geometry nodes lets you bring all of those observations in and be like, all right, Blender, look, the closer we are to a corner, the more I want this type of moss, which is it lets you do all that procedural automated stuff. And so I'm excited. I'm like, this is everything I wanted. Every time I try to learn it, I'm like, okay, well then how do I rotate this thing? And it's like, oh, you idiot. You old idiot. Don't you know? You gotta divide the normal by the dot product of the
vector math,
compound fracture, like whatever. Yeah, and so I'm trying to learn it. But again, I know I need that project that forces me to like, I'm not trying to learn geometry nodes because I know I hate that. But there's a project I'm excited about. I can learn enough and then eventually go, oh, I guess I kind of know geometry nodes. I just haven't found what that is yet.
Is that very similar to how you feel? It sounds like it is.
It is. I asked this question to people because I feel like it takes a certain type of brain, right? We watch the wizards who do geometry nodes. And like Andrew Price pointed out the other day, there's like 5, And it's, it's kind of like Python. I'll bet you could do all of your creative process with Python if your mind worked that way. And I guess with geometry nodes, it was one of the first times where I felt like I might have to just admit to myself that my brain doesn't quite work that way. I can make somewhat complex shaders, no vector math, basic math operations. That's where it tops out. And I guess I'm okay with that. Can get along enough.
We kind of expecting like me, like, all right, I got the shader editor. I get it. Okay, well, I can take this knowledge, kind of slide it over here. It probably won't be too, it's different. It does not.
Different. Oh my
goodness. A couple things come over of like certain like assumptions and stuff you can take from the shader editor, but not enough.
Yeah. I guess there's part of me that thinks people need to hear this because I know I've experienced our students who voiced what we're talking about. Like I'm waiting for that moment where it clicks, and I feel like it might not click for a lot of them, and that's okay. But it doesn't take anything away from geometry nodes. It's amazing, and for the people that it will click, I mean, we're kind of talking about Houdini. Like, not everyone just takes to Houdini, I don't think. So, I don't know. But there's a concern from you when I bring this up that, like, don't discourage. And I completely agree with that, too.
Yeah, because, I mean, you're talking this way, but both of you have used geometry nodes to make cool things. I've seen it for both of you.
We can backpedal. Yeah, I know.
It's one of those things where it's like you don't have to be an expert to do the basic things. Even the basic things give you more power than what you had before. So it's like, okay, you don't have to do all the crazy, insane stuff. You can just make a cool array, and that's also helpful.
There's a part of using Blender where usually you can kind of figure out where things are. Like there's a button in the physics tab, and you go, oh, claw, okay. And you can kind of like fumble your way through, especially with like the recent changes where they put all the view stuff. It's all icons in the 3D viewport of you can click this gizmo and move the cube. So if you don't know what you're doing, you can kind of figure it out. And then there's this stuff of the, like, I call it like the because I said so type things where it's like, well, you hit this button and then that's how it happens. Like, how was I supposed to know that? Well, someone has to tell you, and I'm telling you right now. And I feel like geometry nodes is completely that, like, because I said so space, which means the only way you can learn it is through somebody teaching it, like on YouTube or something. I don't think you can just open up geometry nodes and intuitively figure out, especially because so many of those nodes are very specifically solving problems that, like, even if you knew you had the problem, you wouldn't know that was the name of the solution. Yeah. So somebody has to be kind of hand-holding you. And I think people are making better. The people who are making tutorials are great.
Gifts to humanity.
Yeah. Like, here, I'm explaining from zero. This is how you do geometry nodes. Like, oh, thank you. But yeah, again, you need that project that's so all-consuming that you're like, I will push through the frustration of having to watch a million video tutorials, hoping that it addresses the problem I'm having.
I think you're hitting on something that, people look at you and I think can relate again to this dream of building worlds. And is it fair to say that, like, for you, building worlds is maybe the bigger draw or enjoyment than like storytelling?
It's the thing that has definitely taken the forefront. The reason I'm excited about the next episode that's coming out is because I'm finally. Here's the thing: it takes me a very long time to make everything, and I like telling stories that start from zero. It's like it's a nothing character in a nothing place, which isn't the good way to do story, especially not on the internet. Don't do that. And I've learned that lesson, and I'm gonna try to change that. But that means everything I've ever released is basically showing characters at zero not doing anything. And then there's the inciting incident, and each, things keep getting more interesting, keep adding more stuff. But I've never gotten to that bit, so it's just people hanging out. So finally I'm at, like, the next episode starts to be like, oh, but then this is why you should care about this. And it's a character trying to do an actual thing, and they have agency, and these are the obstacles. And you go, oh, I can get behind their attempt to try to do this sort of thing. So that's what I'm trying to do.
Okay.
It's really scaled up over the past several years. Like, you're hiring actors and you're working with these big sets and all of these things. For example, you rented that boat for, I don't know which episode that was, but you rented a giant boat, and there's so much logistical stuff that has to go into that. How have you felt scaling this up over time so that you can do bigger things, but also that's a lot of work?
So the boat was an experiment in doing things kind of the Hollywood way, because I've always done things like the garage way, but I'm 36. I can be an adult, like, for once. And so it was this thing like, all right, what if we actually hire professionals and we get an actual location, we do everything the right way. It was still low budget, but, like, comparatively, it was, the most expensive shoot that I've ever done by huge. We had people there, medics there in case anything goes wrong. We had people watching the gate and ushering in and doing makeup and running the numbers, and we had catering. Like, we had people coming in, doing all the food, and I'm sitting there in the cafeteria just, like, looking at, like, 30 people all eating the food and the vegetarian options, and I'm like, yeah, nobody else cares at all. No, that was a little personal triumph of, like, look, and everybody's just like, yeah, because we eat when we're on a set. I'm like, yeah, you do. So that was fun. But it was also, the whole point was trying to get that experience to see what was worth it, what was worth the money, and kind of what I could take back to a cheaper workflow. Like, we had a great camera team. We had a guy pulling focus, a guy basically, like, taking care of batteries. We had the DP. We had somebody wrangling the data. We had, like, a 4 or 5 person team just to make sure at any given moment the camera could go. We had a guy, clipboard and all that, which is great. But also, if you have a DSLR, kind of know what you're doing, have a sense of how to shoot in natural light with intention and all that, and charged batteries, you can do 90% of that just hang it, like, just yourself. And that difference is what happens a lot, where there's this, like, when you really need that reliability, when you have a giant big set and everyone needs to know they can rely on you, that's where it's like you need a lot more. Sorry, I'm babbling at the moment, but as opposed to. So I'm thinking through. I haven't really thought about it in this term specifically, but, like, when I show up on a set myself, I just have a camera bag with, like, an extra battery in it, and I'm like, that's because if one battery is bad, then, like, and that works great for me because the batteries, that's enough batteries. But on an actual set, you need way more than that, because otherwise you've got 30 people all sitting on their hands. So that's where you get this. Suddenly everything's very expensive because every single thing needs to be basically foolproof. And if you can decide, well, we can assume some things won't be foolish, you can save yourself a lot of money. Actors, great. You have to have good actors. Everything is about actors. That's all. I think you can film a thing on a potato, and as long as, like, you've got somebody that the audience wants to see succeed in a goal. If you've got a bad script, good actor can fix a bad script. Good script can't save a bad actor. I am all about actor. All the best actors came down to LA. No, there's good people in Seattle. Most of them are in theater, hate film, so you have to, like, trick them.
So was it worth it? Did you find that it was worth it or not worth it?
Yeah. There's the other thing which is very interesting, which is, like, this last episode, when I do the math, I finished, like, 2 seconds of final stuff per day. Like, when you divide the 15 or the 15, 20 minutes by the last, like, year and a half I've been working, which means every 2 seconds of the episode, you're watching a day's worth of thought and energy and effort. Whereas when you do things more efficiently, we filmed, like, 40 minutes of stuff over the course of, like, 4.5 days for the boat shoot. And it's there, like, it works. Fortunately, like, the script was leaning more on a character-centric thing where you were invested in watching the characters do things, as opposed to, like, and here's a bunch of montages. And so, like, it's still okay, but it also comparatively feels really empty, because I'm like, every we filmed this entire 6-minute scene over the course of like an hour and a half. And so there's an hour and a half worth of, and that's where pre-production is important, obviously, but like it's a very interesting distinction. And you'll be able to feel it like in the show, which I don't mind. I like that kind of meta, like, oh, the show is evolving. You can see kind of different things. Like, I think that's cool, but yeah, it's definitely different.
Question: does the hyperbole fit in Dynamo Dream world?
Yeah, it's just a sport.
Okay, cool. Okay, they are in the same world. It wasn't something separate. Okay, cool.
And I'm kind of embarrassed, but also like it was kind of the point of you look at it and you go, oh, that's just like, it's like it's Quidditch or rollerball or pod racing. It's all of them. It's every crazy sci-fi fantasy sport. Just like it's football with a gun. It's all that stuff.
So one thing you've said several times is you need that project to push through like the thing that you're struggling with learning. And I feel like my experience with students is they're more often interested in the tools than having that project. And so they have all this knowledge about how to do this one part of geometry nodes based on a YouTube tutorial or one of our tutorials, and then they never make anything. And I think about, they relate to you, I'm sure, in what they dream of doing, but maybe they lost the priority and put Blender kind of ahead of what they're making, and like the cart before the horse. And I feel like that might be one of your superpowers. When everyone looks at you like, how does he do what he does? You are like, your priority of creating a world or creating a story is so far out front of the tools that you're using the tool in the best way, how it was designed. It's just a means to an end. Do you see people also kind of switching those priorities?
Sometimes, yeah. Or like trying to replicate something that they already saw, which is part of the learning process. I think that's great.
Absolutely.
And there is a thing I found working with people. It's like 1 out of every 100 people does think in that kind of other way. And again, it's a narcissist, because I guess I'm implying that maybe I would, but like meeting other people where they already have the thing in their head, and so all they're trying to figure out is how to get the tool to do that thing in the easiest possible way. And it doesn't matter what medium they're in. It's like, oh, okay, I'm already picturing the thing, so I just have to figure out how the paint works, or like I just have to figure out the paintbrush, or I just have to figure out the tool of the thing. And you see them kind of like, I was teaching animation to a bunch of kids, and like all of them, they were like, hey, I'm making little Sonic the Hedgehog, like 2D. No, like I showed them how to cut pictures out of Sonic the Hedgehog and like make him wiggle around and be like, I'm Sonic the Hedgehog. And then there was one kid who's like, no, she's like this tiny 8-year-old girl who just got it. And she even was like, I know you didn't make all of this in After Effects. What were you doing? I'm like, oh, it's Blender, but I don't really have time. So I gave her like the 5-minute version of like, all right, G for grab R thing. It's on the computer if you want to use it. Right. You can tab into edit mode. Good luck. And I come back and she's doing it. And she's like, okay, but how do I do this? And I was like, you're right. Like, you couldn't have figured out how to do. You pieced everything together, and she had this idea of what she said. I want there to be a fat cat that jumps onto a robot, and the robot turns into a pin, and it pops the fat cat. Yeah. And I'm like, that's so wild. And by the end of the day, she'd figured out how to do it. And so it was this very distinct mindset of like, she's just trying to figure out how to get the tool to do that exact kind of thing that she needs. And I've seen that in a few people where they're like, look, I'm not trying to learn the tool. I don't want to be, Mr. After Effects or Mr. Blender or whatever. They're just trying to make this specific thing that's in their head. And I think that could be I don't know. Do you have that experience at all with your teaching? Or maybe you can't say because you're a professional teacher.
Oh, am I?
I don't know.
Oh, I guess technically.
I'm not. I haven't taught in like, so I'm like, oh, I'll compare all of the kids I had 10 years ago.
I see people just like, I want to do what Ian can do. And not like literally the same thing, but boil that down to what you're actually doing is you're creating these worlds that are super immersive and super interesting, super detailed. And you can do that in fantasy or like stylized, whatever. It's not the aesthetic, but it's just Blender only exists to create things. And have you ever heard of a workshop porn?
Oh, where it's just the beauty and the organization of the workshop. Yes. No, that is okay. That's what you're talking about. Yeah.
And they're not making anything with the tool. It's beautiful, and I wish my workshop looked like that. But it's funny. I'm not saying it's wrong or anything, but what's the point in having a workshop that's not making anything?
I know of people, in Blender who's focused so much on having the absolute efficient workflow. You can model anything so fast, and then it's like
got nothing to build.
It's like a blank canvas. Right. If you have any possibility, what do you make? And that can freeze a person up.
Yeah, so I'm trying to encourage my students, like, remember why you're in this in the first place. I know Blender is an amazing program and like a community that's worth idolizing, right? And we're called a cult, and I think we need to own some of that because it's an ideal, and that's a beautiful thing. But never forget that it is just a means to an end. It's here to create things, and I try and tell them, focus on what you want to make. That's why we're here in the first place.
I shouldn't have done that whole, like, some people just have that certain, that was the wrong little
Not
little
at all.
rant
No,
for the
I don't
moment.
think so at all.
Like, I think it is kind of true. It's the whole, like, William Langren or whatever. That's where it's like, oh, okay. And that's where it's like, yeah, of course you're learning piano now. Of course, you're just going to go and, like, learn how to figure out how to express yourself in this different stuff as you're mapping out kind of your domain.
Right. He's got something to make. Like, that seems what's so evident. And as a 16-year-old, that's bizarre. It kind of reminds me, though, if he has moved on from 3D, do you remember Alex Roman, 3rd and the 7th?
He just disappeared.
Yeah.
I remember after that, he got a job for like Silestone or something, which was like a quartz company, and made this incredible fruit falling down and turning into gems. And it was beautiful. And then he disappeared. And I remember reading somewhere, it's like, well, I kind of conquered it.
Yeah. No, that's a different type of mindset. That's
Right,
incredible.
Right. But I can imagine William being that way too. Like, I kind of conquered this, and I'm on to piano. I don't know. We don't know anything about the guy. I don't, at least. Interesting. Anyway, I don't think you're wrong at all that some people get it. And I think that's part of the getting it is that little girl. I have a vision of what the result can be, what I can create that's unique. And that's what I'm getting to. And that's the reason I have to learn these tools. Anyway, I think that's...
Because I get stuck by the rules, like, most of the time of, like, in society, or like if there's something that says wait here for the thing, I'm like, I have to wait here. And then every once in a while I have a friend who's like, no, you don't. That's like that's just the thing that, like, a sign says. Like, you can just, I don't know. I'm like, yeah, but
like jaywalking or something in LA.
Like, oh, I'm not gonna jaywalk.
Wouldn't dare. But in Blender, you kind of represent, you're aware of the rules. I think this is really cool about you. Like, I just had a conversation with someone who was like, you use sRGB on these texture alphas for your brushes, and they probably should have been data, like no data, non-color data. And I'm like, I think you're right, probably. Because I don't care enough about the rules that I'm like, if I zoom out, what does it change about the end result? Probably not that much. And I admire that a lot about you, because you're aware of the rules, but you don't let that distract you from getting to what you're trying to create. I think
this is the distinction. Yeah, is you're not trying, like when I'm working, I'm not trying to make a city in Blender. That's a huge. I'm always thinking in terms of, like, the shot, and I'm thinking cinematically. I'm thinking even more than the shot. What is the audience's experience of the shot, and knowing where is their focus going to be, and, like, I'm going to do the work there. Yeah. Everything else, I'm just trying to keep impressionistic enough to, like, give that feeling that I want for the shot. But, like, I have seen some people where they go, well, there's a car, so I need to model a car asset, and so I'm going to do all of this stuff. And, like, that's where you jump to the other thing of, like, well, there needs to be a picture of a car. Like, there has to be a car there, but you don't have to model a whole car.
Yes.
And so making all of those decisions for where you can cut corners and what can just be a picture, or what you can, like, Photoshop or do that in the context of just, like, it just has to work from this one angle, though.
Otherwise, it's just impossible. There's literally no way any human being could make all of that stuff.
Yeah, no, you can't, you gotta pick. I remember in my 20s, I thought you had a lot more time, but, like, now I'm like, man, no, I gotta pick my battles very specifically.
And, like, I think your stuff now looks more complicated and more like your city looks more expansive than ever before. But you said you're kind of doing less because you have less time. That's impressive.
Yeah, so it was a thing that was not bumming me out, but, like, for a while on Instagram, a lot of people were learning CG so they could, like, get some crazy Instagram. Like, it was just, like, the thing for, like, the clout, but, like, a lot of people were just making the same picture over and over and over because they found one that did really good. And I'm like, eventually it's like, you're not putting yourself in, you're not innovating. There's just the same thing over and over. That's where I guess I get a little judgmental of, like, I like it when people are taking some risks or kind of being weird or something. And it is so easy to make a giant city in a computer. The one that, like, when you see it, you go, whoa, because it's just kind of scale. Computers are really good at copy and pasting and randomizing and making things go off forever. And kind of extending that, like, I built some assets that were good for kind of copy and paste type buildings and plugging them into geometry nodes. So I could just make a warbly plane that goes off into the distance, and then, it's buildings, and it looks like you have this, like, infinite kind of city. So easy. And it kind of depressed me a little bit. So then the challenge was like, okay, I'm going to take this as the base, which is great. I'm not overwhelmed. The city's already there. Now I just have to have fun adding little specific, like I'm going to add a little church. I'm going to decide what that church is. I'm going to give it a little wacky neon sign. All right, here's a little market. The camera's going to be moving, which is, I love having a moving camera, like views out of a moving vehicle, because the motion blur means you get that impression of it. Everything can be really janky. People can just be, tiny little polygons of whatever. And so I get to make these really low poly textural markets and stuff that you see out of the thing, and the experience of watching the shot is like, whoa, I'm looking at a city full of all this stuff, and it's like, it's copied and pasted, geometry nodes thing with like an afternoon of making funky little signs and stuff. And that is a really fun kind of space to be. But again, a lot of it knows what the audience experience of the thing is going to be, and working within that, and like the motion blur, and like putting limits in so that people can't just stop and stare at your shot and find all of the mistakes. It's the reason people love shallowed up the field. You can get a thing that feels really realistic, but without actually having to like model everything beautiful 4K.
Absolutely. I think there's a lot to glean from the way you work in how minimalistic it is, but how immersive it is. Yeah.
And again, I think it's just the balance of like, I love going hard on specific things, but I want them to be I hate going hard on something that like isn't going to be in the shot or that I don't enjoy doing, which is a very lucky place to be. It doesn't work for doing client work or anything like that, because
okay.
No, this only works if you're in a happy little place working on your passion projects.
Speaking of client work, I had a question. I saw somewhere that you did freelance for like 15 years. Is that right?
Yeah.
Okay. A quote that I remember from an instructor about freelance, because we get a lot of questions about freelance, people wanting to break in and start a career that way. And this guy told me, he was a teacher, and he said, if the price is right, say yes, even if you don't know what you're doing, because you'll be able to learn it fast enough and no one will know. Do you agree with that?
Yeah. Yeah, I think so.
Okay.
Again, especially like if the catalyst is that specific project to teach you that thing, you got to find the project. Somebody offering you a bunch of money and you can't let them know you don't know what you're doing is a great catalyst for finally figuring it out.
So, okay, cool. I think I agree with it too. I struggle with, if I haven't done the exact thing before, I don't want to disappoint, and so maybe I won't take the risk or whatever. But I wonder if a lot of people have that concern, but I peg that you might not be that type.
Well, so there's also, with experience, you kind of learn too what you can learn. Like there's times you go, I don't know that, but I've done enough gigs to kind of know that learning that there's a process for learning it, and like that isn't going to be, that isn't horribly scary.
Right.
Whereas when you're first starting out, maybe you don't have as much of a sense of like what you can learn on the fly. Because a lot of times things are a lot more complicated than, or it's very easy to get something that looks okay, like really fast, but then actually making it production level is like the other 99% of the work that maybe you're not anticipating. So yeah, I don't know. That's the balance of experience. But yeah,
absolutely.
People should take whatever jobs they can get these days.
Yeah, I agree.
It's true.
Yeah.
One thing that I was curious about is, I might be misremembering, but assuming people have come and talked to you about maybe directing a TV show or a particular film or something, what would it take for you to do that? Because I'm assuming you're pretty content making what you're making now. It seems like you have a lot more opportunity. Do you ever want to do stuff like that, or are you just, nope, I just want to do my own thing?
It ties a lot into what we've been talking about, for sure, of like the awareness that at the speed I go, a decade of my life, my entire 30s will be like, here, it'll entertain you for 40 minutes. And you go, that 40 minutes was a lot of work. And I go, yeah, it was. It's 10 years. But what I love is, again, film's ability to kind of like transport you into another headspace, another location, and make it feel real and all that. And I love even like sitcoms and stuff where it lets you exist in that space as if, those friends are real or whatever. Like that's what it's doing. It is being a friends in a room simulator. I think there's a lot of value to that. I think especially now, like the movies people really want are like comfort movies that they can watch over and over. And I think that's basically because it's a comfort simulator. But you can't do that. You need time to let people exist in that headspace. And if all of like everything I'm making is kind of like a 20-minute, like I put a year of CG in this 20 minutes, and people go, whoa, that's not that thing at all. And I'd love to do that so much, where it's like, oh, you can just live in the world for a few hours. So that is a reason I would love to, if somebody's like, here's all the money in the world, go make a show. But like we were talking about, I'm so used to the process forcing me to be creative like things go wrong. So you have to, that is a reminder to stop and be like, okay, well, what would like the creative solution to this be? I've talked to like big directors who like get to work with like, you know, Weta and ILM and stuff. And they've said that, I don't know, maybe they're just making me feel better because I'm still in my garage, but they're like, yeah, when you know ILM is going to be able to do whatever you want, there's nothing pushing back against you, forcing you to like have to be creative. You're just in a vacuum and you can make any picture appear on the screen. Wow. And it's hard because so much of filmmaking is so hard that like you need something pushing back. Yeah. And if you have the infinite Disney budget and like the most talented visual effects artists in the world, like, wow. Yeah, they feel like they're floating.
Yeah. Hey, we need to go. Oh, okay.
Ooh, okay.
Hey, we're ahead in an hour, so that's what we've been aiming for. So we can wrap it up. Okay.
You can wrap it up.
Okay.
Bye.
Yeah, okay. We'll be out.
Cool.
Thank you. Minutes.
Well, thanks for letting me talk. So I sit alone working on things, and I'm like, I'm thinking thoughts. And so the moment anyone's like, Ian, what's your thoughts on this? Apparently, I'm like, I will tell you.
This is fantastic. So fun, I know. Thank you for sharing. Thanks for you're just such a unique character in this community, and there's a lot to learn from you. And I appreciate you being so willing to share not only your vision and what you've created, but how you go about it. So thank you for doing this.
Thank you. It was great to meet you.
Hey, great to meet you, man.
Get to hang out with you again.
Yeah. Have any last thinking thoughts?
No, I don't
Any more
think
rants?
So.
Come on, there's got to be one more.
So many rants. No, we'll save those.
All right, sounds good. Thank you again. Bye.
Bye.
And thank you, dear listener, for listening. To follow Ian, just search for Ian Hubert, Hubert, on YouTube, Patreon, Instagram, or Twitter. If you want to become more confident in your Blender skills so that you can make your own short films, check out our huge library of courses at cgcookie.com. And with that, we've completed the second season of the Denoise podcast. Please leave us a review and share the show with your friends if you've enjoyed it so far and would like to see us come back for a third season. That's it for now. Have a great rest of your day.